So there are two things we want to do today. The first thing we want to do is tell you a little bit about our project in Ontario for the McCuller First Nations Management Group. And then we want to share with you, thank you, what we've learned through our 7 years of working with McCuller. For all of you who are thinking about doing projects, we have some best practices for risk mitigation. I'll just use my computer. So just a brief word about myself and my partner, John Toombs. We were founded in 2003. The name of our company is Peregrine Management Partners, like Falcon. We specialize in fundraising for long haul and fiber to the home networks only in unserved areas, usually in remote and rural areas that are very hard to serve. We've raised over $500 million for our clients to date with public, private, and nonprofit funding, and 100% of our grant applications have been funded. So we're pretty proud of that. But the way that we keep our track record is we know who's likely to get money, and we don't mislead people who probably aren't. So our two projects in Canada and the US are Indigenous projects. In Canada is Rapid Lynx Broadband, which is the Rapid Lynx Broadband project of McCuller First Nations Management is a massive project. It began in 2017 with about $67 million in funding from ISAID and Ontario. And today it's funded at $155 million, and it's connecting all 9 McCuller First Nations. It's owned and operated by McCuller First Nations Management of Thunder Bay, Ontario, with a working group comprised of 9 directors from all of the communities who provide input and direction to McCuller. The second project, largest project that we've done that's Indigenous is Balsam West FiberNet, which was a fiber optic backbone network and 4 fiber to the premise networks in the Appalachian Mountains of 3 states in North Carolina. They had tremendous terrain barriers, isolation, deep mountain gorges, huge granite mountains, and it was privately funded and is now owned by a joint venture of the Eastern Band of Cherokee and Drake Enterprises, who is a tax software developer. They own the network. They only require making $1 in profit every year, but they own their own backbone network all the way from the mountains to Atlanta, Georgia, and they pay the lowest price for their internet service. So a little bit about the McCuller project. It's actually 2 projects. It started in 2017 with a grant for the 5 remote communities, beginning in Araland and going through Martin Falls, Yamaton, Neskantaga, Webequie, and Nebanamic. That was a $67 million project covering 726 kilometers of backbone fiber and connecting 5 of the communities on fiber to the home. All of the engineering was funded by Indigenous Services Canada. All of the construction was funded by ISAID and Ontario Mines in 2018. There was $42.1 million in federal funding and rebates of HST, which are reinvested in the project. $41.4 million was provided by Ontario Province. So it's been a long, hard season, a lot of challenges in the north. Winter roads are eroding sooner and freezing later. A number of delays, but we're 90% complete now with that project, and we expect to be complete by the end of March of next year. The second project was funded 2.5 years later, and it begins at Araland and goes to the south and east, connecting Ganoogaming, Long Lake 58, and Constance Lake. This is a very important route, not just because it connects all 9 First Nations, but also because it connects the Matawa Rapid Links backbone to the global internet backbone that crosses Canada at Toronto. And that's extremely important because one of the biggest reasons why remote and rural areas do not have broadband is because they cannot afford the upstream connectivity to the global internet. So in the US, there was a joke for years that AT&T would just love it if you went in and built a fiber to the home network in these little mountain communities because you had to buy your upstream connectivity from them. And they could price it to the point that you were out of business. And so they just took over your network and ran it and said, thanks for building it for us. So I said, and the funders know this, the CRTC knows this in Canada, and they've taken steps to ensure that there's affordable access to this upstream connectivity. So their upstream connection is at Ganoogaming. It just so happens that Rogers Telecommunications has a facility there, and they have breakout equipment, which means that they can connect their fiber to Matawa's fiber in a Matawa facility, and they did do that. And let me tell you how important that was to Matawa. Before we discovered the Rogers facility at Ganoogaming, we had one option to connect to the internet, and that option was to go over a Bell Canada network over a Hydro One line. The cost for that was going to be $3.2 million up front. And at the time, a 1 gigabit circuit was offered at $7,000 a month. When we found Rogers, which took over a year to find fiber from the north to the south along the old CN Railroad, we finally found some. Rogers owned it, but they told us they didn't have any breakout equipment. But it just so happened that we knew someone who knew them, and they said, yes, they do. They just don't know it, which is not unusual for the big carriers. They don't always know what equipment they have in every facility, but they did have it. We were able to connect. Their upfront non-recurring cost was $489,000. And their cost for a 10 gigabit circuit was $2,500. So actually, we are deeply indebted to Rogers. I always say that everywhere I go. I'm not on their payroll, but they actually saved the broadband financial plan. So the Rapid Links Phase 2 network, which is what we've been talking about, is another 256 kilometers of backbone fiber. And fiber to the premise in all four all-season road communities. The engineering was funded by ISED and Ontario Mines, and it began in 2021. Construction was funded by ISED and the Ontario Ministry of Infrastructure, and it began in 2024. There was $55.5 million of federal funding, rebates of HST, and $14.7 million in provincial funding, and it is 31% complete. But we do expect completion by next fall because it's along all-season road. So upstream connectivity to the global internet, we just talked about that, and Rogers. Matawa has its own co-location facility in Toronto. It's called a Meet Me room. These facilities are giant buildings with a huge raceway from running through the middle of the building that contains nothing but bundles of fiber optic cable. And there are little rooms that you can lease where you pull fiber from someone you want to connect with and cross-connect it with yours. And that's how you connect to the global internet. And Toronto and Winnipeg are two of the largest global internet backbone points in Canada. If you can get there, you can get the lowest cost and you can buy service from carriers from around the world. So it's very important. So Matawa owns their own Meet Me room, and their electronics, which are state-of-the-art, will support easily 100 gigabits of service per second to each community. and they're upgradable. So the fiber optics itself, the cable, and I can just say right now that I've never done a wireless project. It's not because I don't like wireless, because I do, but I used to work for an investment bank, so I know a little bit about financial valuations. The fiber optic cable lifespan is 75 years because it's made of glass, and glass does not corrode or rust. It's covered with a protective sheath and metal cladding to keep the laser beams that run over the strands of glass from leaking photons and weakening the signal. So the fiber optic cable is the lowest cost scenario over the 75-year amortization period. Wireless doesn't contain media. It's all about the electronics. Electronics have to be replaced every 7 to 15 years. So when you look at it on an amortization basis of 40 years, fiber is actually the least cost alternative. It's also the fastest and most secure form of communications in the world. So, risk mitigation strategies. We think we can best help other communities that are planning to build networks by telling you what can go wrong, not what can go right, because these are things that are deal stoppers. They can just stop a project in their tracks because they cost money, you can't get a permit, or you've got defects. And so, especially in rural and remote areas of Canada where you've got very unique risk, superficial bedrock, boulder fields as big as a truck, wetlands, severe winter weather, and eroding winter roads. The winter roads are a big problem in the north now because they're freezing later and thawing earlier. So, and wildfires, which have become more frequent and hotter than at any time in the past, which is why we no longer recommend aerial for backbone fiber. It should be buried. But in the interest of time today, we're just going to run through these really fast. I'm not going to read my slides. I'll just tell you, but risk mitigation strategy number one, this is the thing that most people do wrong. Fail to include overhead in your project and fail to include inflation. Inflation in 2 years in Canada was about 4.3%. And so on a $60 million project, that was $2.85 million just because of the time factor. You should also make sure that you include a contingency, and you can't call it a contingency because that is not an eligible award expenditure. So what you have to do is raise your pricing for your construction, labor, and materials. And we recommend 15% at minimum for projects in the Canadian Shield because you are going to hit rock and you will be drilling. Risk strategy number two, there are some people in this audience who probably won't agree with us, or they will, but they won't like it, which is to separate your engineer and your construction contractor. Design build projects are great for things like roads where you're going to do it the same way every time and you can see what you're doing. They're not really so great for underground networks. Once that network is under the ground, you can't see it. You don't know how deep it is. You don't know if it's defective. And also, engineers who work for contractors have to balance their professional ethics, which is to recommend the best and lowest cost alternative, with the values of their employer, which is to make more money. So we always do design, bid, build models. We don't do design build models. We separate the engineer and the contractor. We also award the engineering design and the inspection services separately. And that's because not all great engineering firms have great inspectors. Sometimes it's better to take a look at that separately. So deployment strategy number three, leave enough time for permitting. Permitting. That's going to be the biggest delay factor in your project. And delays cost money, not only because of inflation, but because of delay standby fees that your contractor can charge. The network owner is responsible for the permits. At the time of the bid, you should have all of the permits in hand. If you don't, and you delay the contractor, they can charge hundreds of thousands of dollars in delay fees. So get those permits done really quickly. Also, we've been reminded that the ministries have some sway with the Ministry of Transportation, as well as the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. So if they're unduly holding you up, you can contact the funders and they will intervene for you. Strategy number 4, use a unit-based contract. Unit-based means that the contract for construction is broken down into assembly units, such as 1 meter of fiber optic cable or 1 vault in the ground. By breaking it down into units like that, instead of paying time and materials or percentage of progress, which involves judgment, units are not subjective. They're either in the ground or they're not, and you know what the quantities are because the inspectors tell you that every day. So at the end of the month, the contractor is paid only for the units that have been properly installed. So it's transparent, it's accurate, it's easy to know exactly what you're paying for, and it avoids errors. It's also easy to adjust cost because at the end of the project, the number of units is always going to be an estimate. The contractor will be paid for what's actually placed, not what you told them that it would be placed. So it's good for the contractor as well. Risk strategy number 5 is the contract, obviously. The contract that we use is a U.S. federal government contract. It's probably one of the best things the U.S. federal government has ever done because they've been funding projects like this from the Agriculture Department for about 85 years. So the funders know every trick in the book, and they know how to forestall them when you're in construction. So the whole idea is to keep the number of change requests and overruns down. So they require that, and we require that the contractor review the route before they bid and certify that they've made a careful examination of the soil conditions and the terrain characteristics, and that their bid prices include all of their cost, including fuel, personnel, mob, demob, camp, everything. So all of those costs have to be embedded in the units, and they are paid for the quantity placed each month. This allows, and the other strategy is we require the contractor to go out and review the route again with the engineer before construction starts, and then request modifications within 10 days. What that does is it allows the contractor to work with the engineer to ask questions and suggest modifications that could be beneficial for everyone. But the point is they've looked at it twice, so they should know what they're doing. Strategy number 6, don't allow mob and demob to be paid separately because of wildfires. Mob and demob can cost $1 million to move fiber and equipment and personnel and camps in and out. If you have multiple wildfires and your contractor has to demob and remob to the site, it can cost you millions of dollars. So those mob and demob costs should be included in the unit rates. And contractors need to carefully consider the risk of their projects, and they need to build that risk into their unit rates. Strategy number 7, hire a qualified construction manager and hire experienced and qualified inspectors. Make sure that they've read the technical specifications and the unit descriptions and that they know what they're doing when they're in the field. There should always be 2 inspectors in the field, and there should always be an inspector whenever underground construction is taking place. Again, once that fiber is placed, you can no longer see it. You don't know if it's 4 inches or 4 feet. Risk strategy number 8, sometimes there are obstacles in the field. In order to avoid re-permitting, to move the fiber away from the obstacle because permitting takes a lot of time. Build in a huge construction corridor, 300 meters, 500 meters wide, which allows you to move around obstacles without re-permitting. And deviation is a much lower cost alternative to deviate around an obstacle than to drill or bore under it, which is very expensive. Number 9, purchase your own fiber and do that at the beginning of the project. Contractors like to mark up materials because they can control their profit margin, unlike personnel and labor. So they mark up fiber optic cable a good bit. By buying your own fiber, you can save $1 million or more. And then you advance that to the contractor for use in the project. When they place the fiber, they simply deduct the material cost from your invoice. So it's a cost savings, and it's also good for the contractor because they don't have to put out as much cash flow on day one. And remember, this is a unit-based contract. So if they buy $8 million worth of fiber, they can't get their $8 million back until the last unit of fiber is placed, which could be 2 or 3 years. So this assists their cash flow. And here's some parting advice, finally. Consultation is critically important at the beginning of every project, but consultation should be ongoing because these are long projects that can span years. Communities make changes. They build things, they move things. They want you to use another road or another entrance. So it's really important to go back to the community just before construction starts and make sure that everybody is aware that you're coming in, when you'll be using their winter road, and exactly where you're going to do your deployment, and allow the community to make modifications if necessary. So good luck to everybody who's planning to do these kinds of projects. It's a very fulfilling life that I have, helping people get connected to the internet, like your elder said earlier. It's something that I love to do, and we do well by doing it. So it's the best of all worlds, and we wish you all the best of luck.